From 2018 to 2021, on average, around 400,000 people a year fled the Northern Triangle region of Central America to escape the economic hardship and gang violence plaguing their own countries, El Salvador, Honduras, and Nicaragua. Their destination was the United States, which for many years had condemned their home countries to dire hardship through a policy of economic imperialism. However, what often awaited these refugees was another form of misery.
Aquí el frío no es terrible, de verdad que sí. Aquí más que todo uno tiene que abrigarse y estar ahí metido en la casa de campaña hasta que sin otros, o sea, como si fuéramos madres irresponsables, no nos fuéramos traídos. Entonces tenemos consentimiento que ellos no es para que estén pasando todo esto.
This image reflects some of the most violent times in US history. It shows pre-Civil War America and men on horseback hunting down slaves who have escaped from their plantations.
There's a reference, there's reference to slavery, slave patrols who used to run and find runaway enslaved Africans, and sometimes would chain them together if they caught them, and they'd be on horses, and you'd see the Africans chained together, being taken back to the plantations.
Former US President Donald Trump argued that tough border policies were needed due to the possible danger Americans faced from what he called a Central American street gang called MS-13. But it's interesting to discover how this gang originated.
Central America's problems do directly affect the security and the well-being of our own people. And Central America is much closer to the United States than many of the world trouble spots that concern us. El Salvador is nearer to Texas than Texas is to Massachusetts.
During El Salvador's civil war in the 1980s, left-wing rebels battled a US-backed right-wing government that was blamed for widespread human rights abuses. For incoming President Ronald Reagan, the perceived threat of communism trumped any concerns about human rights.
It was very real in the minds of many people in the Reagan administration. The fear of the Soviet Union, the fear of advancing communism. It was the forefront of American foreign policy. This is where we were going to draw the line in the sand against the advance of Soviet-inspired communism. It was the foreign policy issue. It was on the front page every day. It was on the evening news every night.
There was a huge fight in Congress about the role of the United States. So what the Reagan administration chose to do was more invisible things. Give weapons, give guns, give training. Well, you can't have a democracy with these levels of violence. You can't have a democracy if there's no civilian control over the military.
Fueled by billions of dollars in US military and economic aid, the war in El Salvador ground on. As the smallest country in Central America descended into a hell of violence, more and more refugees found their way to the US. That's when MS-13 was born. As American Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has tweeted, the US spent decades contributing to regime change and destabilization in Latin America. We can't help set someone's house on fire and then blame them for fleeing. Ironically, the refugee crises it caused are now destabilizing the US itself. Many Americans are beginning to complain, much like their European counterparts, about rising crime that's creating greater political and social instability. On Christmas night 2022, 3 buses carrying Venezuelan migrants were driven from Texas to the home of Vice President Kamala Harris.
We're committed to fixing the immigration system. Instead of working with us on solutions, Republicans are playing politics with human beings, using them as props. What they're doing is simply wrong. It's un-American. It's reckless.
All those people in D.C. and New York were beating their chests when Trump was president, saying they were so proud to be sanctuary jurisdictions, saying how bad it was to have a secure border. The minute even a small fraction of what those border towns deal with every day is brought to their front door, they all of a sudden go berserk, and they're so upset that this is happening. And it just shows you, their virtue signaling is a fraud.
Along with widespread drug addiction, gun violence, and a widening income gap, the immigrant crisis has become yet another issue causing deepening divisions within U.S. society. Instead of just sending the migrants away, shouldn't the U.S. pause for a moment, examine the roots of the crisis, and reflect on who caused it in the first place?
Images may appear to be identical, but looks can be deceiving. The difference is not always obvious. It has to be discovered. There are always different sides to a story. We put the focus on the details. To see more, to understand better. CGTN. See the difference.